We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I join with the comments about Jack Dromey? We will, I think, be doing tributes in due course in relation to Jack. Well, there we have it. After months of deceit and deception, the pathetic spectacle of a man who's run out of road. His defence that he didn't realise he was at a party. It is so ridiculous that it's actually offensive to the British public. He's finally been forced to admit what everyone knew, that when the whole country was locked down, he was hosting boozy parties in Downing Street. Yes. Is he now going to do the decent thing and resign?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is...
Hancock went.
I think somebody will be going for an early cup of tea as well. Can I just say, the question's been asked. I want to know the answer. Your constituents want to know the answer. I don't need any extra help either. So please, Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the point that he's making about the event that I attended. I want to repeat that I thought it was a work event, and Mr. Speaker, I regret very much that we did not do things differently that evening, Mr. Speaker, as I've said, and I take responsibility and I apologise, Mr. Speaker. But as for his political point, I don't think that he should preempt the outcome of the inquiry, and he will have a further opportunity, Mr. Speaker, I hope, to question me as soon as possible.
Keir Starmer.
Well, that apology was pretty worthless, wasn't it? Let me tell him why this matters. Yesterday, in this chamber, honourable members told heart-wrenching stories about the sacrifices people across the country were making. This House and the whole country were moved by the honourable member for Strangford as he talked about his mother-in-law dying alone. He was following the rules, whilst the Prime Minister was partying in Downing Street. Is the Prime Minister really so contemptuous of the British public that he thinks he can just ride this out?
Mr. Speaker, I heard the testimony of the honourable member opposite, and I echo his sentiments. It was deeply moving. Nobody who heard that could fail to have been moved. And I know that people up and down the country made huge sacrifices throughout this pandemic, Mr. Speaker, and I understand the anger, the rage that they feel at the thought that people in Downing Street were not following those rules. I regret the way the event I have described was handled. I bitterly regret it and wish that we could have done things differently. And I have and will continue to apologise for what we did. But, Mr. Speaker, he must wait for the inquiry, which will report as soon as possible.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister's former Health Secretary broke the rules, he resigned. Yes. And the Prime Minister said he was right to do so. When the Prime Minister's spokesperson laughed about the rules being broken, she resigned. And the Prime Minister accepted that resignation. Why does the Prime Minister still think that the rules don't apply to him?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not what I've said, and I understand the point that he makes. As I've said, Mr. Speaker, I regret the way things happened on the evening in question, and I apologise. But if I may say to him, I do think it would be better if he waited until the full conclusion of the inquiry, until the full facts are brought before this House, Mr. Speaker, and he will then have an opportunity to put his points again.
Keir Starmer.
This just isn't working, Prime Minister. No. Everyone could see what happened. Exactly. It started with reports of boozy parties in Downing Street during lockdown. The Prime Minister pretended that he had been assured there were no parties. Yeah. How that fits with his defence out, I do not know. Exactly. Then the video landed, blowing the Prime Minister's first defence out of the water. So then he pretended he was sickened and furious about the parties. Now it turns out he was at the parties all along. Can't the Prime Minister see why the British public think he's lying through his teeth?
Prime Minister, it was what the public think, not what a member is saying. That's order. And I certainly don't need any help from round here. If somebody wants to help me, they can help somewhere else. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's up to the right honourable gentleman to choose how he conducts himself in this place. He's wrong. He's wrong. I say to him that he is wrong. He is wrong in what he has said. He said what he is wrong what he said is wrong in several key respects. But, Mr. Speaker, that does not detract from the basic point that I want to make today, which is that I accept that we should have done things differently on that evening. As I've said to the House, I believe that the events in question were within the guidance and were within the rules, and that was certainly the assumption on which I operated. But can I say to him, Mr. Speaker, that he should wait. He should wait before he jumps to conclusions, Mr. Speaker. A lawyer should respect the inquiry. I hope that he will wait until the facts are established and brought to this House.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, so we've got the Prime Minister attending Downing Street parties, a clear breach of the rules. We've got the Prime Minister putting forward a series of ridiculous denials which he knows are untrue. Yes. A clear breach of the ministerial code. That code says ministers who knowingly mislead Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation. The party's over, Prime Minister. The only question is, will the British public kick him out? Will his party kick him out, or will he do the decent thing and resign?
Mr. Speaker, I just want to repeat that I think that the right honourable gentleman, I know that it is his objective, and he's paid to try to remove me from office, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that, and I accept that. But may I humbly suggest to him that he should wait until the inquiry has concluded. He should study it for himself. And I will certainly respond as appropriate, and I hope that he does. But in the meantime, yes, Mr. Speaker, I certainly wish that things had happened differently on the evening of May the 20th, Mr. Speaker, and I apologise for all the misjudgments that have been made, for which I take, Mr. Speaker, full responsibility.
Keir Starmer.
The Prime Minister's a man without shame. The public want answers to their questions. Hannah Brady's father, Sean, was just 55 when he lost his life to COVID. He was a fit and healthy key worker. I spoke to Hannah last night, Prime Minister. Her father died just days before the drinks trolley was being wheeled through Downing Street. And last year, Hannah met the Prime Minister in the Downing Street garden. She looked at the Prime Minister in the eye and told him of her loss. The Prime Minister told Hannah he'd done everything he could to protect her dad. Looking back, what Hannah told me last night was this. She realises that the Prime Minister had parted in that same garden the very day her dad's death certificate was signed. What Hannah wants to know is this. Does the Prime Minister understand why it makes her feel sick to think about the way that he's behaved?
Mr. Speaker, I sympathise deeply with Hannah, with people who have suffered up and down this country during the pandemic, and I repeat that I wish things had been done differently on that evening, Mr. Speaker, and I repeat my apology for all the misjudgments that may have been made, that were made on my watch in Number 10 and across government. But I want to reassure the people of this country, including Hannah and her family, that, Mr. Speaker, we have been working to do everything we can to protect her and her family, and it is thanks to the efforts of this government that we have the most tested population in Europe, with 1.25 million tests being conducted every day. We've been working to ensure that this population, our country, has the most antivirals of any country in Europe. And, Mr. Speaker, it's because of the efforts of the government, of officials, of staff up and down Whitehall that we've driven the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, one of the fastest in the world. And that is the reason, Mr. Speaker, that we now have one of the most open economies, if not the most open economy in Europe, and one of the fastest growing economy, Mr. Speaker, in the G7. And, Mr. Speaker, whatever the mistakes that have been made on my watch, for which I apologise and which I fully acknowledge, that is the work, Mr. Speaker, that has been going on in number 10 Downing Street.
Debates that shape the nation, now in your language.
Suzanne Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited my local job centre and I'm absolutely pleased to announce that the adult claimant count is down 28% and the young adult claimant count is down 40%. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking all the hard work of the Stourbridge Job Centre for their dedication to actually achieve these results, and also to contribute to the jobs revival that's happening across the West Midlands? 61,000 new jobs since March 2021.
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I thank her for that. And it's notable that the opposition don't like to dwell on these points, but it is an astonishing fact that we have 420,000 more people in work now than before the pandemic began, and youth unemployment at a record low, Mr. Speaker.
John Morrissey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Colne Valley Regional Park runs through my constituency and the Prime Minister's. Would my right honourable friend join me in paying tribute to the volunteers who tirelessly work to preserve this precious green space? And will he work with me to create better protections for this park moving forward?
Prime Minister.
I certainly will. I join her in thanking the wonderful volunteers, and I will do what I can to assist her in protecting this beautiful green space.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Grant Bailey, went back to Afghanistan in September. He disappeared in December around Christmas time. We think the Taliban have him. Can my right honourable friend advise me and his family whether he knows anything about this man, who has him, and what is being done to get him home?
Prime Minister. I thank my honourable friend for raising the case with me, and I hope I will organise a meeting for him with the relevant minister as soon as possible to establish what we can do to help Grant.
Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the Prime Minister didn't spot that he was at a social event. That's the excuse, isn't it? Come off it. I mean, how stupid does the Prime Minister think the British people are? The worst of it is, he's already managed to completely destroy Allegra Stratton's career. He's tarnished the reputation of Lord Geit. And now he's making fools of every single MP who cheered him earlier. Every single one who goes out on the radio and television to defend this shower of shenanigans. Would it not be absolutely despicable if, in the search for a scapegoat, some junior member of staff ends up losing their job, but he kept his?
I'm grateful as ever, Mr. Speaker, to the right honourable gentleman. I think a former member of the Conservative Party, as I understand it. But I'm grateful to him for his party political advice. I don't agree with him, Mr. Speaker. I've come to this House to make amends, to explain what happened on May the 20th, and to apologise. But, Mr. Speaker, I really think that, with all humility, I must ask him to wait for the result of the inquiry, where he will have abundant opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to question me again and to make his party political points again. But until then, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ignore his advice.
Final question, Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, can I join in the tributes to Jack Dromey, an outstanding trade unionist and member of this House? Mr. Speaker, after another shameful week for his government, this has been a shameful attempt to apologise to this House today. So can the Prime Minister explain why the only person to resign so far for this scandal is Allegra Stratton, a woman, while he, the man who sanctioned and attended at least one party in 10 Downing Street, still sits in his place? Mr. Speaker, advisers advise and ministers decide. So will the Prime Minister, for the good of the country, accept that the party is over and decide to resign?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank him for his question. And I respect the point that he's making, but I must say I disagree, and I would ask him I would ask him to wait and see what the inquiry says, and I'll be very happy to talk to him then.
I'm going to let people leave before we start the urgent question.
Debates that shape the nation, now in your language.